Good evening. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Education to order. It is Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. The Portland Board of Education is meeting in a blended format with some participants here at Casco Bay High School and others joining us via Zoom. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo? Mr. Burke?
Here.
Mr. Irish? Senor Rodriguez?
Presente.
Ms. Russell Better?
Here.
Ms. Thompson? Ms. Trevorrow?
Here.
Mr. Youssef? Ms. Allen? Ms. Boxer-McCumber?
Here.
Ms. Chung?
Here.
Ms. Hill? Ms. Yangala? And Chair Figdor.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And I did hear from Ms. Thompson that she had to work tonight and was unable to make it. And Mr. Irish let me know this afternoon that he is under the weather. So with that, please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the
To
flag
the flag
of the United States
States of America.
and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we are starting our meeting today, as is customary, with public comment. So this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any issue that we're not voting on tonight. So if you would like to address the board about our COVID precautions, now is the time. We'll have an update from the superintendent later in the meeting, but we won't be voting on COVID measures tonight. Mickey, you need to mute your computer. Sorry about that. So is there any public comment on items we're not voting on tonight? And if you are joining us via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature if you would like to comment to the board, and I'll go through those procedures if I do see any public comment. Okay, seeing no public comment, I'm going to close public comment, or we're going to move on. We're going to move to the report of the chair. And for my report tonight, you know, there have been so many major developments regarding COVID since our last meeting. The biggest news, of course, was learning yesterday that the Pfizer vaccine is safe and effective for 5 to 11-year-olds, and that the FDA's emergency use authorization should be forthcoming soon. The reporting suggested that millions of 5 to 11-year-olds nationwide could be vaccinated by Halloween, the sweetest treat imaginable for the holiday, but it certainly cannot come fast enough. And we learned late last week that President Biden's vaccine mandate for large employers applies to school districts in Maine, with the requirement applying to other districts. It will enable us to get our staff vaccinated, our remaining staff, without risking losing critical staff to neighboring districts amid a very serious staffing shortage, particularly in special education and transportation. And that'll happen just in the last 5 days. It's been a roller coaster, and I deeply appreciate the resiliency of our students, staff, and families. We didn't expect to start the year amid the most serious COVID surge statewide since the start of the pandemic, but we have adapted very rapidly and had just 5 cases across the district last week and 2 cases so far this week. Of course, we don't want any cases in our schools, but when there are cases in the community, we're going to see them in our schools. It's taken a Herculean effort, and I know it's been particularly hard on our staff amid a critical staffing shortage. And I wanted to say that we see you and deeply appreciate your resiliency and commitment. I look forward to today's updates from the superintendent on the start of pooled testing, which began this week. how we are providing increased support for our students in quarantine and the implementation of the federal vaccine mandate. And with that, we are going to move on to the report of the students. And today we're going to hear from Tessa Boxer-McCumber, who is going to provide an update regarding Portland High School. Tessa, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. So pretty much the only thing to report right now is that we've been getting back into the groove of in-person learning. We have a new schedule, which includes a Block 5 Learning Center, which is helping students get face time with teachers and extra help on homework. And for seniors like myself, college applications, it's very helpful. Our student council and National Honor Society met for the first time last week, and we elected Senior Hallie Chase as our student council president this year. Right now, we're working on homecoming, Spirit Week, and pep rallies, just trying to, again, get back to normal. And our Black Student Union at PHS put up our student mural, which is in our upper cafeteria right now, in partnership with the artist Candice Gosta. Our fall sports have all started, and right now both football and cross country are undefeated, which is great. And lastly, we hosted a vaccination clinic on the 16th, which helped a lot of students and staff get the opportunity to get vaccinated.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tessa. Okay, and now we're on to the report of the superintendent, Superintendent Batana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice job, Tessa. Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land in which our city and schools stand. The Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, the Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or people of the Dawnland. We're honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we're committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. Last week, we began the month-long celebration of Hispanic or Latin American heritage in our schools. Much like the Wabanaki Confederacy, Latin American heritage is the result of the political alliances of people with diverse national heritages in an effort to increase their voice through collective action. It is important as we teach about Latin American heritage in our schools to highlight the unique character of the many peoples who identify as Latinx or Hispanic. Beyond their many countries of origin, they also represent multiple racial identities, including Black, white, and Indigenous people. They speak different languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, and scores of Indigenous languages such as Quechua, Guarani, and Aymara. And their presence in the United States ranges from recent arrivals to people who have lived in the on U.S. soil since before there was such a country. And while we often think of this month as a time to celebrate the contributions of people of Latinx backgrounds to the United States, it's also an opportunity to learn about how the United States helped to shape Latin America. For example, Jose Marti, father of a free Cuba, was a reporter for Latin American newspapers in the United States during the Civil War and Reconstruction. What he saw and experienced shaped his thinking and affirmed for him that a free Cuba had to be so for all Cubans, regardless of race. Don Pedro Albizu Campos, an early Puerto Rican nationalist, fought and was imprisoned for his opposition to American colonial rule. I would like all of our students, and especially our Latinx students in Portland Public Schools, to learn about the rich past, present, and future of our Latinx community. I would also like to extend best wishes to members of our Jewish community as they continue to celebrate the Jewish high holidays of Yom Kippur last week and Simchat Torah this week. We hosted over 100 families at our multilingual back-to-school fair this past Saturday at East End Community School. I would like to thank the many staff who gave generously of their time on Saturday, as well as the many volunteers who were there to share important information about the federal EBT benefits and staff a COVID and flu vaccine clinic. It was great to see many families gaining access to Infinite Campus, pooled testing, and federal lunch benefits. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to remind all of our families that we need you to complete the free and reduced school lunch application. As you've heard me say before, we no longer charge for school breakfasts or lunches, thanks to state and federal programs and waivers. However, there are potential benefits, such as the federal EBT payments to families that accrue from completing the applications regardless of their income level. So everyone has a reason to complete them. Finally, as many have heard me say before, significant state and federal funding for Portland Public Schools is tied to the percentage of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Significant decreases in that number, which you will see later during one of our presentations, will cost the district dearly in terms of state educational programs and services funding, which is an equity formula calibrated to provide more money for districts with higher percentages of free and reduced lunch students. Additionally, the district receives nearly $3 million annually in federal funds, largely tied to the same indicator. Those funds support significant supplemental programming at many of our elementary schools. And finally, I would like to recognize Portland High School senior Teresa Conroy and Deering High School senior Jove Emmons for being selected as National Merit Scholar semifinalists. We hope to have them at a future board meeting to recognize their accomplishments and scholarship, as is our custom. So now I would like to begin our school reopening update. As we have been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. Today's update will focus on a variety of topics, roughly focused on two key strands of work that were highlighted by the board at our last meeting. Improving our testing capacity and better supporting the needs. Can you advance one, please? Advancing our testing capacity and better supporting the needs of students who miss school because they are quarantined. Before that, though, we want to provide a quantitative update on the number of cases and the demographics of quarantined students. So next slide. Among the bright spots of this data is that we've seen minimal transmission in school, minimal evidence of transmission in school. By and large, our mitigation efforts have been successful. The overwhelming majority of the cases that you see originated clearly outside of the school setting. And I know that the board has been asking us to collect and report on this data by demographics. So we've done that in this next set of slides. First, showing the demographics of the case count. And next, showing the demographics of the quarantined cases. Next, we want to talk about our efforts to reduce the number of students who are quarantined through testing. Through the discussion at the last meeting, it became increasingly clear to me that we needed to pursue additional measures to prevent large numbers of students from being quarantined and to have better understanding of the prevalence of COVID in our midst. Yesterday, we launched pool testing for students in grade K through 6th, as you heard Chair Figdor note in her remarks. And now Assistant Superintendent Erin Townsend is going to provide you an update on the status of that testing.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, board members and the Portland community. As the superintendent shared, we hit our target of launching pooled testing this week. Pooled testing is that additional layer of mitigation for our students who currently do not have access to vaccines to help keep those students in school and to monitor for positive cases. We had 5 schools test on Monday and another 6 schools test this morning, and Peaks Island will be testing on Friday. We anticipate results coming back in 24 to 48 hours. So the first group of those we expect within the next day at some point, at which point we will conduct the follow-up BINAX testing for any pools with a positive result. I'll note here that we were able to meet our target, our goal of launching on the 20th, despite not getting all of the staffing support that was expected. We've only had one of two people from the vendor on the ground these first few days. They have committed to having an additional two people starting next week, so we're hopeful that that will come through as promised. We do have 4 individuals from the Maine Association of New Americans that are committed for the BINAX follow-up testing on Thursday and Friday. And starting next week, this team will be complemented by USM nursing students to be able to support any follow-up testing that needs to happen. I share this to underscore the resources necessary to manage the implementation, even at this scale. Our school teams have done an incredible job with enrollment for pooled testing. In this first round, we have over 2,000 students participating, which is over half of all eligible students in grades K through 6. I'd like to shout out the teams at Rowe Elementary, Longfellow, Ocean Ave, and Peaks Island for all getting over 70% of their students registered to participate in pooled testing. Enrollment is ongoing, so we'll look to continue to increase these numbers as we move forward in the weeks ahead. We are also monitoring the demographics in a variety of ways of who has signed up and who hasn't at this point to be able to target our outreach efforts. On this slide, you can see that our current group of participants is slightly overrepresented among our students who are white and slightly underrepresented with our students who identify as Black or Latino. We're using a variety of strategies to continue to enroll families, including reach out from EL teachers directly and parent community specialists to build understanding about the opportunities for pooled testing and to get them enrolled. This has been a significant effort from our nursing team, our school secretaries for processing enrollments, and our teachers and leaders, many of whom were involved in the collection of vials and packets across our schools yesterday to lift this important mitigation strategy. So thanks to all of them for that work. And I'll turn it back over to the superintendent to share additional efforts underway to expand our overall testing capacity.
Thank you, Aaron. I also want to highlight your work in making this rollout of pool testing possible. It takes everyone doing their part, but it also takes someone leading that effort, and you've done an amazing job of that. So what we'd like to do now is talk a little bit more of some of the additional testing options that we are pursuing. So we are in the process of negotiating a contract with a provider to improve our ability to test students who are asymptomatic close contacts and need a negative test before returning to school. Currently, with our partnership with Greater Portland Health, we're able to test all symptomatic individuals. They've also, on occasion, been able to help us with asymptomatic testing when we have large caseloads, such as they did a couple of weeks ago when we had that large number of students at Lyseth who needed testing to determine if they were safe to return to the school and whether we were able to bring those classrooms back. Testing capacity regionally is not what it needs to be, and families often struggle to get these tests for both peace of mind and for proof of negatives. We also, as you know, have capacity at the school level to administer rapid tests to students who participate in pool testing and whose pool returns come with a positive result. This new partnership, if you can go to the next slide, Aaron, will give us a weekly PCR testing clinic for those close contacts, as well as potentially for anyone wanting to voluntarily test. We're also looking at this as a possible source of testing for staff who are not vaccinated and are required to test weekly as a result of the new federal vaccination mandate. The program comes at no cost to the district. The company doing the testing bills private insurance where patients have it, including Maine Care, and where the patient is uninsured or the tests are not covered, they bill a federal fund established just for this purpose. As a district, we will provide a testing site, coordinate with families to get them to testing, including getting consent, and also communicating results. Next, Assistant Superintendent Townsend will update you on the progress of our other mitigation strategies, including the reconfiguration of classrooms and the creation of outdoor learning spaces.
Great. As we reported at the last board meeting and reopening update, we were taking a number of steps to tighten a few of our health and safety practices in response to the early flurry of cases. Since that time, schools have all reconfigured their classroom configurations to maximize distancing in classrooms using rows where furniture and space allow. Schools have also implemented seating charts to support targeted contact tracing and to minimize the amount of classroom movement. This strategy is most effective at the middle and high schools, and we will continue to vigilantly monitor our case data to determine if any additional restrictions are necessary. Also, as we described last time, we have assessed the current reality of distancing across all of our classrooms with all students back to in-person learning this year. Leaders analyze their facility data as well as their master schedule data to determine how many classes or sections can maintain at least 3 feet of distance. What we learned is that the vast majority of our elementary classrooms already meet or exceed this standard, which is the most critical grade span given the current lack of vaccinations for that age group. At the secondary level, the results were more varied given the various facility and enrollment constraints. Approximately half of sections are able to maintain at least that 3 feet. We are also, since the last update, adding additional staffing resources for our nursing and health teams in addition to the pooled testing supports I mentioned earlier. This has been necessary because our nurses are back supporting and doing the full-time work that they did prior to the pandemic, in addition to the detailed contact tracing work, which is increased from last year, and supporting the ongoing kind of testing work. So we're in the process of hiring an additional full-time nurse to free up our nursing coordinator. Shout out to Nurse Tina. I want to make sure she gets some of that attribution for the incredible work coordinating the pooled testing and all of this. We would be nowhere as a community without Nurse Tina. And then we have hired some additional clerical temps that are providing ongoing support right now to be able to do some of the detailed data entry tasks associated with contact tracing, searching vaccination records for students, updating DOE spreadsheets, and so forth. Many of the tasks that we don't need our nurses doing, but need to be completed. So we continue to look to be able to bolster that team to be able to provide the health and safety supports needed to remain full-time in person with students. Finally, as you may have seen over the past week or so, we have, almost all of our tents back up. The tents last spring, if you'll recall, were rented in a quick pinch from Wisconsin, and those went away over the summer primarily. And so we've been able, amidst a shortage, to procure 29 and started the year with 12 that we had over the summer and have had 14 additional ones installed now, with one kind of utility one still to determine where we'll go. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Malia Nali, our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching Learning, to describe the supports we're providing for schools and staff to take advantage of these resources for outdoor learning.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually just getting the opportunity to introduce Katie West for the first time. She is our new outdoor learning coordinator. And I don't think you've had the opportunity to meet her in a board setting. So I just wanted to briefly stand up and formally introduce you to her. She's amazing. Katie's been in education for 25 years. She's taught in classroom, outdoor, and wilderness settings. She's certified across grade spans. This is her second year in our district. Last year, she was an art teacher at Lyseth. Fun fact about Katie, she taught outdoors every day except for 6 last year. So she is clearly the right person to lead us in terms of having walked the walk on how to go about outdoor learning. So she's going to step you through this model she's created for us, which is a phase strategy, thinking about our immediate long-term needs. And then we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into phase 1, which is what we're focused on right now. So Katie.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Malia. Thank you, Superintendent, and it's so nice to meet you, Board. There are 3 evidence-based points that inform the work I'm going to share with you tonight. 1, time spent outside protects against virus transmission. 2, outdoor learning provides positive academic outcomes. And 3, nature-based outdoor experiences offer proven mental health and SEL benefits for all students. Most of us are aware of these statements about outdoor learning. And this year, Portland Public Schools began a longer-term vision towards integrating outdoor learning with more intention and depth. That said, we are still in a pandemic, so I will share briefly this initial vision and more in depth of where we are right now. So the phases, as we're seeing it right now for outdoor learning, is phase 1 is getting students outside for health and safety. The priority here is to keep students healthy, safe, and to maximize low barrier outdoor opportunities as much as possible during the school day. Phase 2 is outdoor teaching and learning, skill building for teachers and students. Here we'll be creating core outdoor routines across content areas, understanding how to design meaningful outdoor learning experiences, and getting strategies to build the walls of our outdoor classrooms, as well as deepening our outdoor classroom management skills. In phase 3, which I call the permeable classroom and a culture of outdoor learning, this is the real shift towards integration. This is where we begin to weave the existing indoor classroom work with the outdoors and the outdoors with the current indoor curriculum. Here we began to make more transition times meaningful through a walking classroom and envisioning permanent outdoor year-round structures. Phase 4 becomes the intersection of outdoor learning, Tier 1 instruction, and equitable outcomes. This is where long-term practices and pedagogy for integrating outdoor learning, place-based education, and experiential education intersect with the curriculum and instruction. And the components that will go with each phase we'll see repeated are infrastructure and supplies, building capacity for learning and teaching outdoors through professional development, and creating an outdoor learning community and culture. So I'd like to just take a couple moments and catch you up with where we are right now in phase 1. So with phase 1 and the priority of keeping students healthy and safe, starting with infrastructure. How do I do it? Okay. Great. You just, I don't know why it didn't work. Okay. So the first step has been to reestablish the outdoor classrooms. There were 156 classroom spaces established last year. And so we're continuing the work from last year this fall by reestablishing, as Assistant Superintendent Townsend was saying, all of the outdoor classrooms, setting up tents and shade structures, stumps, and seating. Schools are currently using the camp chairs, folding chairs, picnic tables, easels, whiteboards acquired last year. Currently, we are in the process of refining the need for our outdoor spaces in phase 1. Some items were stolen over the summer or moved, or due to large class numbers, we are taking inventory again, and then seeing if there's any more need for purchasing new items. And in addition, we now have for technology, radios have been purchased for schools so that teachers are equipped when they're outside to communicate with the school as needed. Also, I'm working with IT and outdoor liaisons to gather information for Wi-Fi boosters outside, particularly to start at our middle school and high school locations. And researching best options for voice amplification, such as portable microphones outside. And I'm currently doing a needs assessment for outdoor gear, which is designing a gear library model, including inventory and cost lists, which to outfit each building with items from a master list for students to have dedicated outdoor items while they're in school. And the second one, there we go. Is that the right? So in phase one, the second component is building capacity for learning and teaching outdoors through professional development. Here, I'll be offering weekly tips for outdoor learning through videos and slideshows for teachers and administrators showing how to create habits of going outside for meals, movement breaks, and other low barrier times in phase one. Building upon this, the instruction at this time develops into learning strategies for classroom management in the outdoor classroom and more extensive skill building. I'm offering in-person experiential PD for teachers, school-wide professional development for schools on an ongoing basis. I've already done some and we'll have several lined up. These are offered as hands-on direct experience professional developments as research, as I go on to say later, research-based, repeatedly says that teachers are more likely to go outside if they see it modeled for them in person and if they get to experience it themselves. Once they see the benefits, this builds confidence and assuages teachers' anxieties about outdoor learning and creating structure for outdoor meal times. Additionally, I'll be offering an optional progressive PD series this fall for interested teachers by grade band. I've been doing teacher consultations and will continue to do one-on-one meetings with motivated teachers to help cultivate a culture of outdoor learning. And then, as I said before, just the research shows that teachers are more likely to go outside when they see their colleagues. So that's the importance of creating the culture around it because it just continues to build support for that and confidence. And the third component is creating an outdoor learning community and culture. So in phase one, I'm in the process of identifying teachers who are taking initiative with outdoor learning with their classes. I'll be filming short videos with strategies from them for other teachers in their grade band or content area across the district. I've continued working with outdoor learning liaisons from the building liaison model last year, which helps they act as the line of contact between each site and my position, as well as helping to maintain outdoor classrooms and schedules. And each week in the Tuesday news, Tuesday bulletin, I'll be celebrating successes and sharing photos and anecdotes from schools and teachers to help foster a community of outdoor learners and teachers. And engaging community. We are enlisting the PTO assistance for school-specific needs and help. And I think this weekend there's already a couple work parties going on at Rowe and Talbot for outdoor classrooms. We are looking to integrate parent volunteers with proof of vaccination in the outdoor setting to assist teachers. And we're looking towards community partners. And I wanted to give a mention to outdoor learning in the gardens because the garden program is continuing to grow with support from the garden ed techs, the cultivating community, and garden clubs. So they are doing a great job to support our outdoor learning. And I would love to give a shout out to the facilities department at Portland Public Schools for so much hard work and to the teachers who are willing and learning how to go outside, especially in this time, given that they are balancing the tension of an immediate need to be outside due to the pandemic with larger student groups than last year, full instructional days, 5 full days in person, teacher overwhelm, and lack of confidence outdoors for some. I applaud their efforts. I get to hear the wonderful stories, such as this East End Community School student finding a snail to everyone's delight on a walk outdoors, and how King Middle School has become a hotbed for Foursquare for all the students, or how students of all ages are taking their writing, their investigations, or their artwork outside. These are the silver linings of a challenging time. It is encouraging to hear from the outdoor learning liaisons how teachers are doing the best, and I I look forward to making that even more possible as we build capacity in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Katie. I thought that middle picture was a taste test for escargot that our food service was organizing. Thanks a lot for your first presentation to the board. This is awesome, and you're doing great work, and thank you for that. We're going to pause here and let you ask questions about this first part of the presentation before we move into the second part, where we're going to be talking about the support for students that are quarantined. So we'll pause and let you ask any questions you have about testing, mitigation layers, and outdoor education.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that presentation, Katie. Great to meet you, and that's an awesome vision that you have. So thank you for sharing it with us and for all you're doing. I'm going to start with Mr. Burke, who is joining us remotely and has his hand up. Mr. Burke, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Am I clear in your room?
Yep, you're good.
Great. I just need to share that hearing this, Katie, makes me so happy, to no one's surprise, because as Taylor Swift says, I've got a reputation, and just thank you. It just dreams come true. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right. Are there questions from the board? Mr. Rodriguez.
Ms. Bondo, I'm sorry, had her hand up first.
Yeah. Ms. Bondo.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. This is when I passed by the King Miller School and I saw the tent outside, even though students have been looking over the street, but just see them outside is really making my day, actually, because I think we can use it often. So I have two questions on the outdoor first. So how many we have across our schools? Because I look at Portland High School, I look the way Portland High School is. So what's the chance then we may use those outdoors to all schools, or we just have to some schools, but not to all of them?
So you can come up because I think you have more information. I think we have an expectation that everybody's using the outdoors as much as practicable. And as Katie mentioned, there's a lot of efforts happening to try to build towards comfort and capacity. What I think would be helpful, Katie, for you to share is we talked about the data that about 60% of teachers are spending some time outside, but there's sort of variation from 10 to 90% or something. If you can share a little bit about that, that would help.
I think that the efforts to get outside have been consistent since the beginning of the year. And I'm watching the trending more towards outdoor learning as teachers build their indoor classroom norms with now these larger groups. And so there are some schools that have not as much outdoor time, and some are outdoors as much as 90%. Teachers are outside with great frequency. Are you asking specifically about Portland High?
Yes.
So I've met with Tom Tellerico, who is the outdoor learning liaison, and even was able to go on a walking field trip through the city with him, with Portland High students. So we are beginning efforts to both use the courtyard to write a grant to get the mulch and to redesign that space, as well as begin to look at how we can use the city as a campus, which I know is in the Portland High School vision.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
So it's all in process.
All right. So if I look at the trend, I mean, the school doesn't have a schedule, how often they have to be outside. So it just depends on each teacher, right?
Right.
The way they want to be outside, but the trend is going mostly to the positive ways. I mean, really encouraging them to use this time of the year to be outside often for the student. All right.
That's what I'm noticing. And I think any slow start we might have witnessed was really about building those classroom norms at the start of the year so that we can have year-long successful outdoor learning.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I have a question, I think, for the Superintendent Aaron, for the multilingual families, because I'm not accessing the data, how many on the pool testing. Can I have those numbers, please? How many on the BIPOC students being on the...
Sure. I mean, I can reshare it. I mean, the presentation's in board docs there, and we can follow up with more. We are tracking it by home language. We're tracking it by EL status, by working on free and reduced lunch status. So a variety of measures to get clear about the targeted follow-up that we can do. So I shared just the demographic data here, which obviously, is one view, right? That's different than some of these other views. So we can follow up with some of that additional data. I mean, what we've seen is certainly a strong, overwhelming response period, and that, it really takes some more targeted personal outreach to some of our multilingual families to build understanding about that. And that's part of the efforts that we're engaged in right now.
Because the way we don't have a lot of transmission of the virus in our school is mostly from the community.
Correct. Yep.
So that means reaching out to those families is a good approach to have a lot of students from that category to be on the pool testing, so we can make sure then we get those contact tracing on time. So for the multilingual office, what kind of approach and tools they've been using mostly, and it has been successful to try to reach out those parents, understand, because the thing is that I really see the people to understand the value behind the pool testing.
Yep.
Why is about.
Yeah, maybe I can just also interject. And I think, could you put that slide up that shows the data? Because I think it's important to see that. And I want to really just, commend the multilingual department, Grace Valenzuela, Maureen Clancy, and the family and community specialists, because, as recently as a week ago, our numbers did not look the way that they do now. And so even though there is, still some underrepresentation of our Black African-American students and our Latinx students, that's really improved in the last week. And that's, a testament to the work that they've done. As I mentioned in my remarks, we had, over 100 people at the back to school fair. And, it was exactly what you said. It's, individual work with families to explain the value proposition, what the advantages of doing it are. And when you take the time to do that, that's when you see the results. And so without the work of that team, we wouldn't have data that looks the way that it looks up there. And so I just, have to congratulate them. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do. It's just to continue to have those one-on-one conversations and, make sure that people understand. We also have said from the beginning that this was going to be something that after we started it, people would be more likely to join because they would see the advantage of doing that. The fact that people would not have to quarantine if they tested negative. And so, we expect to see those numbers improve. But I also want to just celebrate the fact that we have over 50% of our, students who were eligible in this. If you recall back when we started, we thought that we would be 20-25% and that it would continue to grow and that eventually we would get to 50%. And so we're already at 50%. In some schools, we're closer to 75%. And, that's remarkable. And we just want to continue. But I'm particularly proud of the demographic data here and know that our team is committed to continuing to reduce that disparity between our population and the participation in pool testing.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. For my last question is I heard you say then we have, I think, 2 people from that company is supposed to be in each school to collect those swapping tests. So that means how many for each school we're supposed to have?
Originally, it was 2 total, so that they could break up Monday and Tuesday. So part of the reason we test Monday and Tuesdays, and Nurse Tina, feel free, I know you're out there, to jump in if you want to help. But so that because of staffing, so that we could have one person be going to a handful of sites, collecting the kind of pools, right? And then another person. Again, this week, we only had one of those people available to us. So it fell to nurses, admins, others to be doing that work.
Okay.
Right now, in the follow-up conversations, they've committed to having 3 people available to us next week, so that it is those folks who are going classroom to classroom, picking up the pools, as opposed to our staff.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Just noting this presentation is excellent and has a lot of really good detailed data, but it isn't yet in board docs. So if you can put it there, it's helpful for board members to be able to look and have that
It
data.
is not on board docs?
It's not.
Sorry. Anne, could you real quick PDF it and drop it in there? My bad. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get to the questions, can I just follow up what we were just speaking about this morning in the Family Partnership Advisory Committee? We'd heard from some members of our multilingual department about those conversations, those one-on-one conversations that we had in the open or the back to school event. And it pretty much what the superintendent explained, how effective that one-on-one communication is and how seemingly easy it is to overcome some of the barriers that people will have, because it's just a matter of giving them factual information. And with the trust that we have with our families, it helps us to get across effectively. And I think that's why we see such a large turnout of folks that have opted in. So again, just to commend our multilingual staff. The question about it was, the first question that I had about it was, have we had any refusals, like straight up refusals, or is what we're aiming at to overcome just people that we have not yet reached through those one-on-ones?
You mean among our multilingual?
In general, just people that have completely said no.
I don't know. I personally haven't had any, flat out refusals. We know that there are probably people that there's nothing that we can do to convince them to participate in pool testing, but, we've not had a significant, pushback element or anything along those lines. I mean, you see the numbers, what they are, and we hope that we will continue to increase them. We do think that, it's mainly people not knowing that, that is at the root of where our numbers are. It isn't people saying that they don't want to participate. Aaron, you got up to say something and I just kept going on and on. So sorry.
No, you've done admirable. I would just say it's an affirmative process, right? So I wouldn't imagine, because people are opting in. So those people who might be resistors just are, we're not engaging with them at this juncture, right? Because it's a positive kind of affirmative process. So.
Okay, all right. Grace has her hand up. So if you don't, I'm assuming that she's also interested in weighing in on this. So Grace.
Yeah, I just want to say that of about 120 families who came to the back to school fair on Saturday, there were only 2 who refused full testing. And mainly the reason is they have kindergartners and they're just concerned that kindergartners wouldn't be able to swab their noses. And so that is, again, another education to let them know that it is as simple as just picking your nose. But I was surprised in terms of the responsiveness of the families regarding full testing.
Great. Thank you so much, Grace. And again, speaking of the relationships that we have with our families. The next question I had was about the staff that we hired to help our nurses with the clerical work. Are those medical clinicians like LPNs, or these are non-medical?
Yeah, non-medical. So they're taking care of non-medical tasks. And Tina, if you want to speak to the roles you've assigned them, but they come from the temp agency and were available quickly to us. And
good, that's fine. I just wanted to understand that. I had a conversation with the superintendent a couple of weeks ago so I can better understand if the district only hires RNs or if we also employ LPNs, or just to understand the makeup of our nursing staff and the support systems that we have for them. I think Assistant Superintendent Townsend mentioned, and it's important for us to remember this, our nurses this year are in the buildings literally with twice as many students or twice as many patients to manage. So giving this extra support to them is so critical in assisting them, and the weight that they've lifted over the last 18 plus months is just unimaginable. So I'm happy to see this support for them and to get them to do what we want them to do, to be good clinicians and to keep our students safe, and then to have the clerical burden lifted off of them. I think that's prudent for us to do for them, and appreciate that. Next, Katie, welcome. So happy to see you. I have to first tell you that a huge shout out to you today from one of our cultivating community staff members, Lily Shalov. And so only because of that, I'm going to put a plug in here. I'm probably out of place. But as we get the infrastructure in place for our outdoor learning, I hope you and I become really good partners in pushing for our garden and nutritional education programs to become full-time in our schools, and that we give those supports to our staff members that have wanted to take that on. So, because I think it's a beautiful opportunity for us to create more outdoor learning opportunities that have real purpose. And I think the folks at Cultivating Community have done a phenomenal job at supporting us by creating curriculum and other ways that our teachers can leverage that partnership. So again, I'm really excited that you're in the district. I love your enthusiasm around this. Specifically love the way that you explain the phases of implementing this. It gives the board a really good understanding of how do we support you, how do we then advocate for this, and then how do we look towards the future to expand on it, seeing the successes. So again, I commend you for your work, and you can count on our support. As you've heard it, the board is very enthusiastic to continue to grow our outdoor learning opportunities. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Russell-Vetter.
Thank you, Chair. Just also wanted to echo, Katie, how happy I was to hear that update, and very exciting. I just had a question for the superintendent about, this was way back earlier when you were talking about a contract with a provider about testing. So is that something that's like kind of in the works so that there isn't a contract, or there is actually?
No, there is no contract yet. We're doing our due diligence. We've had preliminary meetings with the company. Tina and I, Nurse Value and I met with them last week. We have a draft contract that our attorneys are reviewing right now, and we have another meeting scheduled for tomorrow to do some follow-up around, ensuring that they have the capacity and all of that. So we're doing our due diligence, but I'm excited about it, and I think it's something that we need to be able to expand for those asymptomatic cases. That has been our struggle. There just isn't, capacity in the community to do that quickly and well. So.
So my other question about that, and you started to speak to it, but I was just trying to understand when you mentioned the testing is for kids to return to school, right? So kids that have been quarantined, and you're saying that were not symptomatic, but you just mentioned about to be able to return to school, but I know that isn't a requirement. So I'm just trying to, is that for parents that are requesting that, or kind of how would that?
Yeah, maybe Tina, you can weigh in on that. Is it a requirement and we just don't have the capacity, or is it best practice? And
it's best practice. It's strongly recommended. We try to help families get appointments, depending on when the exposure was. We've been able to do some with our community partners, but it is best practice and it's strongly recommended. It's not absolutely required because sometimes a test is just not accessible.
Yeah. Okay. And you might have said the superintendent, but I missed, is the goal to have PCR testing, or is it rapid testing? Or
this is PCR testing.
Determined it is.
We also have the capacity to do rapid testing, but we feel that we have the capacity to do that as well.
Okay.
So this is PCR testing, 48 hours.
Okay. That's what this contract would be for. But when you're talking about rapid testing, is that an option also through this relationship, or you're saying that would be a separate?
As I said, we have rapid testing available right now. This would be a 1 week, 1 day a week clinic is the way we're envisioning it right now.
Okay.
So rapid testing is more like you want to know right now.
Yep.
So unless you wanted to know on Wednesday, this would not be the place to get that help, but you get that from our schools and so on. So this is really to be able to, take all of those asymptomatic close contacts and, provide them with the peace of mind or, the piece of paper that says that they're, clear. Or to identify that they're not and, get them the treatment that they need as soon as possible and pull them out of the environment.
Okay. And when you say we do have capacity for rapid testing, what does that look like right now?
Tina, do you want to talk about that, please?
Yeah, so we, nurses have, all the schools have Binex testing for symptomatic kids and sometimes staff when they get sick at school. And then we can always refer also to Greater Portland for rapid tests also.
Okay. So that is in situations where mostly students or potentially staff are symptomatic, but there isn't at this point any plan for use of rapid tests that is more.
Right. Well, antigen tests are better, are not, I mean, most of the rapid tests are antigen tests, which are not as good for non-symptomatic.
Okay, but there isn't, as far as the relationship with the potential contract or otherwise, any discussion about using rapid tests more as a regular practice, besides for the symptomatic piece?
No.
Okay.
We'd use pool testing.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Are there any other questions from the board? I have one question, and then I'll just note before my question that the school year's just begun. It's just been a few weeks, and it's kind of astounding how much progress has been made. Recognizing that we were in the middle of a COVID surge, or school was starting right, and as COVID surged and adjusting and putting so many additional layers in place, getting testing up and running. The numbers in terms of participation in pool testing are amazing, and I fully understand the barriers in terms of the individual outreach that it often takes to get families to participate. So I just want to thank the superintendent, his cabinet, and Nurse Tina, and everyone who has just done so much, and the proof's in the pudding, right? Like we had 5 cases last week and 2 so far this week. So I just want to appreciate how quickly and how much this has been on top of running our schools. So thank you. My question is probably poor taste to come after my appreciation and recognition of how much work and how all-encompassing responding to COVID has been. But I do have to ask, what is our capacity, and I know that's the wrong question, for expanding pool testing in the coming weeks and months to other middle school students and to high school students and staff?
It's no different than it was before. We've said that is something that we will look at as soon as we actually get off the ground with this. I think we're learning a lot about, what it takes to get people to sign up, and then now we're learning what it takes to do the testing, and we'll now find out what it looks like once we get the results back and we need to make contacts and things along those lines. But again, we understand the need to increase testing capacity, the discussion that we had about the PCR testing supports from an outside vendor are in response to that. We also, intend to look at scaling up pool testing as soon as we have a good sense for what that takes. But as you heard, Aaron talk about, and I know Tina can attest to, it does take a significant amount of capacity, and the challenges that are, the staffing challenges that everybody is facing are very real. That's what company that provides this testing for the state said that they would absolutely be there and provide staffing. And we started that conversation in late July. And here we are, we launched 2 months later and there weren't all the people that they said they would have. So it's, that is absolutely a challenge that we're facing in many different areas. And, but we are, we will continue to look at how do we scale up pool testing now that we've actually gotten off the ground and understand what it takes to do that.
Excellent.
And it's not in poor taste to ask.
Thank you. That is from my standpoint, a very satisfactory answer. So thank you. And unless there are other questions from the board, I think we can move on.
Great. So now we're going to transition into talking a little bit about what is in place for students who are test positive for COVID or are close contacts to somebody who tested positive. And so I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Malia Nally.
Thank you. Hi again. So yes, as the superintendent just mentioned, I'm going to step you through the expectations we have for each grade span, both in the case that a full school or class is quarantined, as well as in a scenario when individual students are quarantined from the class. And as I step you through these expectations, I do want to remind and reground in some of what Emily was just mentioning, our Chair Figdor, about the fact that our educators are very overwhelmed. They are still settling in to being back full-time, 5 days a week with all these health and safety parameters, which you just heard us describe have been a significant lift. We're observing a notable uptick in classroom management challenges after kids have been out of buildings and in smaller groups and hybrid learning for over a year. We're having significant challenges with coverage. So we have teachers and administrators covering duty, lunch, all that stuff. So there's a reduction in time they have for planning and preparation. They are lifting outdoor learning, as Katie described, and that's a whole set of things that are practical about creating the space and that are comfortable about being outside and having the walls and dealing with classroom management when you don't even have walls in your classroom and kind of getting used to that. And we're in the midst of revising our strategic priorities and trying to make judgment calls about where we are going to adjust course and or pace. And whereas last year our teachers had additional time at the end of the day and on Wednesday to manage remote students, they no longer have that time or flexibility since we're prioritizing being in person full-time 5 days a week because that's what we think is best for our kids and that's what we believe our community wants. So I just wanted to be really clear about those caveats because we are going to talk about what we want to and can do for students. But this is super hard because we're trying to do something monumental without even thinking about the remote aspect of when kids are in quarantine. So I'll step you through grade span by grade span. They're not that different, but there's a few nuanced differences. So I thought I would just kind of describe it through each of the grade spans. So in the case of our elementary schools, if a full school or class is quarantined, which we don't expect to happen frequently, but we want to be prepared and have a plan, that's what you're looking at on the, well, I guess it's my left column. So we're enacting the remote learning guideposts that we developed last year. Now, as you know, we were in hybrid, so we never really used the full remote, but we had preparation for that. So we pulled that out, dusted it off, even though I didn't really have time to get dust on it, and revisited that with some adjustments for 5 days, full days. We'll be using Seesaw and Google Classroom as our learning management systems like we did last year in terms of where we're kind of launch class and have assignments and tasks. We're developing differentiated expectations for typical schedules for either early elementary or upper elementary in terms of considerations for screen time and what kids can do synchronously versus asynchronously. There's expectations within those guideposts that there's a daily synchronous morning meeting and there'll be daily synchronous instruction. There's also going to be asynchronous learning to balance out the day and time on screen. And we have very specific delineation on these guideposts in terms of minutes and math and literacy and all that stuff that are in the details. There is an expectation for opportunities to have student discourse that are included in our remote learning expectations, as well as regular teacher feedback throughout the week when we're in this full remote setting. And then we have some take-home resources to make sure all students can access what's being asked of them. It's not as robust as last year, since we're doing this for short episodic situations, but we do have resources committed to some things so that any student has what they need at home to use to be able to engage in that remote learning. So that's, again, probably a less likely scenario as we progress through the year, but that is the plan in that case. One thing I didn't mention too is very in the top bullet, I mentioned we're using those guideposts we developed last year as soon as practicable. So it might be a day or two for schools to get launched and ready if there's a scenario where we're closed for a full week. I think the further we go, the more ready we are with the technology and having Seesaw and all those things up and running. But I just wanted to put that caveat out there. The more likely scenario is that an individual student or, small group of students are quarantined, so not the entire classroom. So in that case, the expectation is that classroom work will be accessible on the learning management system. So the early grades have the Seesaw, the upper grades have the Google Classroom. So if my son is quarantined, he would be able to go on to his Google Classroom and his teacher will have uploaded assignments or kind of the general gist of what she's having kids do during that day. Teachers may have students join class synchronously from home when it's doable and beneficial, but that's not a consistent expectation. There are multiple factors that would be considered both on the teacher side as well as on the family side. So we're giving teachers permission to do that if it can work, but we're not requiring it of everybody for a variety of reasons. So that's a strategy and an option out there. And then the third big thing, and this is newer, is that we're dedicating additional resource for added capacity to support the coordination of remote students. And so we've been meeting with our principals to try to figure out what's helpful in terms of adding some capacity to support students when they're out without adding additional expectation and burden on teachers and administrators who are already overloaded. And so 2 iterations of how this additional resource might play out based on the way principals are thinking of this are, 1, having a third dedicated sub who we think of as a remote learning coordinator. And their job is essentially like a case manager for kids in quarantine. So they know which kids, which classes. They're kind of the troubleshooter. If a family is unclear, how do I get onto the Google Classroom? They're kind of that go-to person to support families, kids, and teachers, just to facilitate and coordinate. We envision this kind of a position having some set office hours for students to reach out to them during the day if they have questions or want help. And so they're kind of a coordinator slash person who's available for support and to help kids through the work that they are being assigned. We don't imagine synchronous learning and things like that, but rather that live support. Another iteration of this additional resource that's come up from some other principals is that they've said, given some of the challenges with hiring and onboarding and getting people ramped up for that sort of a thing, I would rather have some money to pay some teachers for some additional time to be the point of contact more at the end of the day or at lunchtime. Families seem to have been okay with that in the past. It gives that access and support, but it will be people that are more grounded in the curriculum in the building. So this is something where we've realized that we really want to work with principals to think about what makes sense and what positions you to manage this effectively, knowing that the big goal is that there's some support for families to kind of have a touch point with schools, and that if teachers are in class with their full class all day, it's difficult to reach out to their teacher. So that's the concept that we've discussed. And at this point, our next move is to get really clear with administrators who wants to pursue this dedicated sub concept versus a stipend. And then we would do a centralized hiring for that. Again, trying to lift the burden off the administrator by running more of a centralized process around that sort of a thing. So that's our elementary plan. And then, like I said, these aren't wildly different, but a few different nuances for middle and high. So middle school, again, full school or class, very unlikely, but in the case that happens, reverting back to previous full remote expectations, which are basically work and the class schedule is posted through Google Classroom and students engage in live synchronous classes following their typical schedule. It might be the case that if it's a 45-minute block that they are, live interacting for 20 or 30 minutes and then they're kind of off doing their independent work, but it would follow, more of that typical schedule. Again, the more likely scenario where we have individuals out in the middle schools, we are very kind of ingrained in using Google Classroom. That's a very easy transition. Students are already using that. The middle schools would have the advisor check in with their student at least once per week. I think they said that's like if a student's out for the entire week, that would be kind of the bare minimum so that there is that connection and touch point. Same thing about teachers might have students join class synchronously from home where doable, beneficial, but not a consistent expectation. And then we talked with them about the same concept of the additional resource for added capacity for coordinating remote students. And then the high school, very similar. I think I'll just point out a couple of the nuances. Getting used to my readers. I have not mastered these. So I think, let's see here, a couple differences. I'm over on the individual student side because the full school is the same. I will say in high schools, it would only be full school when we're in this kind of full synchronous schedule, because as you can imagine, the high schools, it's a lot more complex. They would have a teacher check in at least once per week. I think depending on the high school, they had different perspectives about whether or not it would make more sense for the advisor or the teachers that students have. So they wanted flexibility to figure that out at the building level, which made sense to us. The other difference is that they do have baked in support blocks to their schedules. So, Portland High has the 5th period. I think here at Casco, they have 7th period. It's not every day. Some of them are 2 days, 3 days a week. But we talked about students who are remote being able to access support from teachers during that kind of flexible remote support block time through video, and that they would try to give priority to students who are in quarantine for some of that time. And the other pieces are consistent with what we've described for the other grade spans. And then just one final note here is just folks might have a question about what if the teacher is quarantined, but not the class? And if that's the case, there's essentially 2 options. Either they get a sub because they're out, or they might choose to want to teach remotely. And so they would do that through Meets, but we would have an ed tech sub to support classroom management in the actual classroom. So that's going to be a teacher decision, and they'll work with their administrators to figure out what makes sense for them. And then a final note is that we're at the early stages of exploring possible partnerships with organizations. Gateway to Opportunity is one of the ones we've had most conversation with so far, to potentially set up some sort of homework or tutoring support system so students who are remote can access some help and some tutoring support through volunteers with some of these partners in the community. So that's nascent. And there's lots of questions about how to manage that so it's helpful and not, additional complexity, but we're excited about the conversations that are starting there. And so I think those are the main updates as to where we are with what we're doing for students who are quarantined when they're remote.
Can you move to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
So the other thing that we wanted to talk briefly about is providing access to meals. What we're currently able to do, what we've done in those situations that we've been in to date, is that our food service department does provide bag lunches and breakfast. So they're both packaged together and are made available to the whole class when it's quarantined. And so in those cases where we've had whole class quarantines, we've done that. Parents are required to come and pick it up. And so, the uptake has not been particularly inspiring. And so that's something that we recognize is not sufficient going forward. So we are working, Dr. Valenzuela and her team are working to organize ourselves to be able to do volunteer recruitment, and if you will, have some form of Meal on Wheels program at each of our schools whenever there's, a significant number of students in quarantine, to be able to deliver food to their homes. We also applied for a DoorDash grant. So DoorDash could potentially be a resource to be able to provide the meals to individual students who are quarantined, and they would just come and pick it up and, deliver it to the home. So we're in the process of pursuing that. We also, if you could go to the next slide real quick, are exploring a partnership with an organization called Revolution Foods that does this type of work across the country. And what we're exploring with them is expanding our CAA CFP program. That's the super snack that some of you may remember from previous conversations that we've done. It's called the supper program. And right now we have a fairly limited presence with that, about 400 or so kids who get that via their participation in our after school programming. So whether it's Learning Works or, Boys and Girls Club or, some of the other after school activities, rec and things like that, students, a lot of our athletes have access to the program that way. But what we're looking at is expanding that to anybody who is eligible and having them be signed up for weekly box deliveries to the home. So basically a weekly supper program. And then the idea is that once people are already plugged into that delivery system, if there's quarantine, then we can expand the box to include breakfast and lunch during their quarantine period. Obviously, that's still in the beginning stages with conversations with the Revolution Foods folks and our food service department, but something that we're excited about, but minimally at least getting ourselves to the level where we're able to deliver some form of breakfast and lunch to our students who are quarantined is the goal that we're pursuing. So before we close and turn it over for questions, I'd like to underscore a theme that you heard in several of our sections, and I think Malia did a fantastic job of teeing up, and you heard it from Chair Figdor at the beginning, and that this is a huge effort that all of this is requiring from our school staff. In the past weeks, many of you have seen articles in both the popular and specialized media about the enormous burden that we're placing on all of our school staff with juggling the demands of mitigation layers in the pandemic and ensuring that students' needs are being met. Our staff came back to school energized by the realization that they would have all of their students in their schools and their classrooms for the first time in a year and a half. And then that reality hit us all. And our staff are increasingly struggling to keep up with the demands of maintaining safety through additional layers of precautions and protections, and also facing the realization that students' learning patterns have been disrupted by months of remote interrupted learning. And for some of our younger students, that they've had no organized learning at all in their entire lives. So while we embrace the challenge and we will continue to bear down to ensure that we meet the expectations of the board and community, I would be remiss if I did not end by highlighting the emotional and physical toll that this is taking on all of our amazing Portland Public Schools people. And so with that, I will open it up for your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. I see a hand up, and I am assuming it's Mr. Burke. Yes. Let's start with Mr. Burke. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you for paying attention to me, Chair. First of all, I just want to offer praise and acknowledge what was just touched upon, that we are dealing with so much constant change, and that you, superintendent and staff, are dealing with that change with so much deep deliberation. You're not just doing something to do something, you're trying to do the right thing in each and every move, and I deeply appreciate that. I just want to highlight that this Rev Foods partnership sounds like a really encouraging option, and wherever that originated from, praise to that point, and praise to the district for hearing the idea and looking into it more deeply. I think that's really interesting. And then on the other side of partnerships, I know you're just in the start of things, and just wanted to highlight Learning Works is an entity that I know works with a lot of our students already, is funded, and is always willing to be a more coordinated partner with us. And I would hope we'd engage with them in addition. That's all. Those are my 2 comments, and just lots of praise and acknowledgement for what's been voiced for how much everybody's caring.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Bando.
Thank you for the presentation. This is something that is bringing a lot of values to support our students, and also to recognize that is taking a lot to our teacher, and I just recognize that. So I have a question, just a sense, just to have an idea. What happened? We have a license just closed, I think, a week ago. So I know this is what we're just building for the future. So just curious to know what happened, because they've been 2-3 days closed. So everybody just stay home, or did we apply any of those options?
Aaron, do you want to?
Well, I was going to speak about what they did for remote learning. Did you want to hear?
Yes, no, either way.
I mean, I think that chime in if there's more, but I think we did not have all the technology deployed in the learning management systems up and running.
Right.
And so they sent home packets. And that was, when I mentioned that we're going to be as soon as practicable, if we had a whole school or whole class shut down, that we would potentially need a day or 2 to sort of do something like that while we get those things running. So another person who I'm excited for you to meet is Courtney. She's our tech integration specialist. She's spent a lot of time over at Lyseth immediately once we realized that what was happening, and we knew that they weren't fully ready with the tech deployment. And so I think they're in a good place now, much more ready to roll, but that was what they did in the interim as we were trying to get ourselves prepared and ready to kind of advance toward the remote expectations that we talked about. I don't know if there's more.
Well, I just want to clarify that we had 4 classrooms where there were known classroom-based exposures, and those classes were quarantined and remote for a period of not quite 10 days, but because by the time we knew, but following our standard protocol. School-wide, it was closed for just 1 day, as we had the concern about these potential additional exposures. And within that first day, we were able to return the vast majority of students to school with only a couple of classrooms as we awaited tests, persisting for a day or 2 beyond that. So just want to clarify that point, that really by and large, except for that 1 day where, we needed to have those students who'd had the known exposure outside of school tested because of the, what we'd seen initially in terms of positivity rates from that. Fortunately, all those came back negative, and we returned students as soon as possible to those classrooms back to in-person learning.
All right, thank you. So my last question is the scenario that I see here for individual students is just, I feel like it's just for the mainstream student, right? So do we have any scenario for our special ed or BRAVE program, or also our EOL students? Or we just follow the same team?
So you're saying for students with in-district programs, is there a different approach? I mean, I think that yes, in so much as their programming is specialized. And so we'd need to be thinking about, how that's different. So they probably, like in Bridge, aren't looking at Google Classroom. So it's sort of figuring out what does it look like to support them while at home. I mean, that's tricky, right? Yeah. Because as you recall, last year, we prioritized having students in some of those programs in more days than others because it was difficult to deliver the kind of programming that they receive remotely. But of course, if they're quarantining, we can't, bring them in. So we would be working with the programs and the educators in those programs to figure out, what of their tools and technology can they bring home and can we support them with? But it would be, I think, pretty differentiated based on the particular student and context and who's at home and the kind of programming we do for them.
If it's not too much asking, can we just have a maybe later on, as soon as you figure out just the big picture, just a few approach, what's going to happen?
Sure. I mean, I think the way we could go about it is give you all some illustrative examples
Okay.
From a few of our different programs. Yeah, we could follow up with that.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I just have, I think, just a short question about the added support coordinator. Is that the right way to speak? Support coordinator for the remote?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it as a third dedicated sub, but where we would hire them with this orientation toward remote learning coordination. Yeah.
Would they be able to help mitigate like connectivity issues for our students, like tech issues?
Yeah, I mean, the way we've drafted potential job description is that they would be the tech liaison. I don't know that we would be able to hire people with that particular skill set, or that could complicate matters for our AT team, but they would very deeply understand our systems and processes. So they would be that, again, liaison for connecting families, because usually families are calling the secretary, they don't know where to go. So they would know this is your person, and they would understand if it's a tech issue, here's how they support and direct them. If it's a, expectation about classroom assignment, this is what you do. So yes, in so much as they're the liaison, but probably not a tech expert.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can kind of imagine how that flow chart sort of kind of works out. And yeah, they probably wouldn't be doing like real in-depth IT, but just basic kind of, like you said, Google Classrooms and Seesaw and just
Right.
operating.
Usually, how do you find my password? Yeah.
Excellent. I guess the other question, I guess this is more, you mentioned, Superintendent, if for a potential Meals on Wheels program, you said that could be deployed when we had a significant number of students out. I'm assuming we'll figure out what the criteria for significant is and when that could be used and just how effective that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Meals on Wheels type of program, so what Grace and her team are aiming to be able to support is, when we have, a kid here, a kid there that, potentially needs, food. And if we have a series of volunteers that are, somebody's doing Tuesdays and Thursdays, somebody's doing, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that we would be able to say, like, here's where, here's somebody that needs food, can you get it to them? So, and then I think the larger scale, program is, when you have a full classroom or a full school to be able to do the deliveries for those.
Good. What is it like getting those volunteers? Do we have a good pool of people? Do you need help? Like, board members have pretty good networks if you need us.
It would be great. We would I know Grace is here and Grace is tasked with that. She's starting to organize for it. I'm sure that you would appreciate any support, but Grace, I don't know, Dr. Valenzuela, if you want to say anything.
Yeah, any support will be, helpful for this. But last year we have a pool of volunteers, about 75 people who were delivering fresh food to families, to about 250 families once a week. And so our thought is to connect back with these volunteers and see if there are people in that pool who could help us. So, and we also have our community coordinators at the school, and we have an outreach to our parent volunteers who've signed up. So we could definitely extend the reach to a lot of other people.
Good. That's good to know. And like I said, board members, it's one thing that we're good at is try to get word out, or at least attempt it. So I'm sure we're all happy to help reach out to our networks and find volunteers. I hear it all the time where parents tell me, you have parents that are willing to chip in. So I'm sure that we have a community that's especially with the meals, that's willing to help. I guess the last thing I was going to say, this might not be something we answer right now, but it is in line with our really critical staff shortages. Just received some communication about some co-curricular events that had to be canceled because we had some shortages in transportation. I think we discussed this being a really unfortunate thing that we anticipated. I mentioned 2 weeks ago my concerns about needs going unmet. I think that co-curriculars are kind of like the first level of things that kids start to miss out of. And it's because of staff shortages. So we talked a moment ago about filling in those gaps. I think we've talked at length about how challenging it is to get bus drivers specifically. Like that's a position that really is challenging, not just for public schools, but for all school districts. So again, just want to underscore what we heard very, very eloquently, said by Assistant Superintendent Nally, just the dire need that we have in our district that all public schools are going through right now. And eventually, all these things are going to end up meaning that kids are going to have needs that are not going to be met. So we just have to be really, really aware of what is going on. What is the work environment of our educators? What is the learning environment of our students? And that these staff shortages are, they're getting in the way of our mission, of our Portland promise. So we need to operate with that in mind every time that we come to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. There are other questions from the board. Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. So I might not hear well, but did we say we will partner with outside company for delivering meals?
We're exploring a partnership with a specific organization called Revolution Foods that does this type of work at scale across the country. It's not a done deal. We've started that conversation last week and, are continuing it this week to see if that's something that would, potentially work for us. I think the hope there is that we could scale up our supper program, something that is relatively small right now, and we would be able to scale it up, and then we could leverage that whenever we have somebody who's going to be in a prolonged quarantine. So this is almost, the quarantine is, we got to this conversation because we were looking for somebody to help us with the quarantine, but it's also just an opportunity to potentially reduce food insecurity by having the supper program have a broader reach than what we're able to do right now.
So is the district going to pay them or they're going to charge on federal?
So the way that it works is that they, these are reimbursement programs from the federal government. So they would get the cost of their meals from that reimbursement. The way that they've articulated it to us, but we've not done the due diligence on it, is that their costs are lower than what the reimbursement rate is, so that we would actually have a benefit on our end, in terms of, if the reimbursement is $4, maybe their charge is $3 per meal. And so we would have $1. And this, I'm making those numbers up, but that's the way that they've, so we would not, at least in our initial conversations, there would not be any additional cost to the district. There could potentially be some additional revenue coming into the district. But again, haven't done the due diligence on it enough to be able to affirm categorically that that's how it would work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay, I think that...
Great. That concludes our hour-and-a-half report.
Thank you so much. Now we're moving to the report of the secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of September 7th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Rodriguez, seconded by Ms. Bondo. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Again, this is approval of our consideration and action of our meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was September 7th. Seeing no public comment, we are going to move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on the motion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving the meeting minutes from our last meeting on September 7th, 2021. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez. Yes. Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Boxer McCumber, Ms. Chung,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, and so the motion passes with Ms. Chung, our student representative who's joining us tonight, voting with the majority. And now we're moving on to our board focus on educational issues for the night, and that is a focus on high school choice. Mr. Superintendent, are you going to start us off?
Yes, briefly, today we are bringing you an update on our high school choice process. For those who have been on the board for a number of years, you know that in 2019, we presented to you on the implications of the high school choice process as it currently exists in terms of student selection and the balancing of our high school enrollment. Today, Assistant Superintendent Townsend is going to reprise that presentation and give you an update on where we are and where we see ourselves heading with the current high school selection process. At that time, I had back in 2019, I had specific recommendations. And, you know, today we don't have specific recommendations. We are going to discuss what those options are and, you know, just leave it with the board to decide whether they want to pursue any of those options further, which would require subsequent work. So we're not bringing anything for a vote or anything along those lines. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Townsend to walk us through this.
All right. Good evening again. I'm pleased to share tonight's update on the high school choice process and outcomes from this past year. I also want to appreciate our high school principals, given all that we've shared about the work going into the day in, day out, who are joining us virtually tonight. So here from Casco, our host, Derek Pierce, from Deering High, Allison Dame and Dr. Ahmed, and from Portland High, Sheila Jepson. So thank you all for joining us tonight and spending part of your evening here with us. So as the superintendent said, we provided the board with a similar update in the fall of 2019. And after taking a COVID year off, tonight's presentation is to bring everyone up to speed on our current reality as we start this school year. So the primary goals of tonight's presentations are to ensure we have shared understanding about our high school selection process, to provide updated data on the enrollment, demographics, and kind of choice preferences for our students and families, and then to gauge board's interest in pursuing any alternative approaches to our high school selection process. So to step back for a moment and remind everyone, this is a brief timeline associated with our current system. As best as can be recollected, and if you were here in 2019, you may remember the superintendent and others did a bunch of digging in the summer and fall of that year to figure out what the timeline had been and how our system had kind of come into being. So prior to 1979, it's understood that our high schools were neighborhood schools, just like our elementary and middle schools continue to be. The transition to choice happened at about the time of the establishment of quote unquote middle schools in the city, moving away from a junior high model and having ninth grade students be attending at the high schools. The system continued in this way for a couple of decades until the establishment of Casco Bay in 2005. This was also the year that the educational options policy was established, which I'll reference shortly. We have continued with these same systems since that time. Policy, as I mentioned, policy JBF is the educational options policy that was established when Casco was founded in 2005 and was reviewed formally in 2016 when Casco achieved full enrollment. The policy acknowledges the value of neighborhood schools, while also communicating the value of providing informed choices for parents and students about their options. It also calls on us to eliminate barriers that prevent equitable access and to examine the impact of the policy on school demographics. Thus, one of the rationales for our presentation this evening. As the final piece of kind of building our shared understanding, I'd like to take a moment to summarize our current practices around high school selection. Students can choose from each of our 3 high schools. However, the enrollment at Casco Bay is capped at 100 students per grade level. We conduct a lottery if there are more applications than space available. This has been the case each year, with a range of initially closer to just over 100 applications in the early years of Casco to a more consistent number in the 180 to 190 range in more recent years. The lottery provides for sibling preferences and strives to keep Casco Bay representative of the overall enrollment in Portland Public Schools, which you will see play out in our demographic slides shortly. In terms of the activities in our selection process, this slide represents, historically what we've undertaken to build student and family understanding about their options. Although certainly there have been a few COVID adjustments in the past year. Typically, some students and families opt to do their own outreach in the fall and to do school visits, but the process generally kicks off in December with a district-wide open house. Historically, this event was focused on supporting and engaging multilingual families, but in the past 2 years, this has been broadened to include all families while still providing the multilingual support and translation to engage in the event. The next step has been for our 8th graders to visit each of our high schools, where each school has some form of a tour and engagement with students and staff to build understanding about the opportunities and environment and culture at each of our schools. This obviously was modified in this past year to be a virtual event, but is a consistent piece of our process. The next step from those visits is initially for families to submit their, kind of selection forms for Casco Bay. Again, families indicate a second choice in the event that they're not selected through the lottery. This typically happens in early February before February break. Those forms historically have been due. After February break, by the end of the month, Casco formalizes their lottery and offers the initial placement to the students in their incoming class through the process of kind of confirming those placements and thus then, the other selections by students in terms of choosing either Portland High or Deering. It is approximately kind of mid-March when we have our first initial 9th grade projections in terms of enrollment across the 3 schools. It's at that time that then our high school guidance teams get to work coordinating with they've been at work significantly, but, begin the work around master scheduling and course selection for the coming year to prepare for the incoming class. Finally, at the end of the year in non-COVID times, we have had a step-up day where students had a chance to visit the high school they will attend before their 8th grade year ends. Last year, unfortunately, we weren't able to accomplish that. So this is kind of the background of the process that we have been using historically to engage students and families in their high school choices. The next set of slides will step us through a bunch of data pieces around both the choices that families are making and what's informing those, as well as then kind of the demographics in terms of enrollment. So to better understand students and families' preferences, we conducted a survey of 8th grade families and their parents last spring before school ended to understand why they made the selections that they did. This is the second time that we had conducted this survey. We did it initially, in the spring of 2019. And again, last year, in spring of 2020, weren't able to accomplish it with the initial shutdown of COVID and all of the complications at that time. But this past year, we heard from over half of our 8th grade students and over 100 parents, so a significant sample size to understand what's informing students and families' choices about their high schools. The results, as you'll see, indicate a very high degree of agreement, regardless of the school they've selected, about their reasons for choosing the school that they ended up going to. The first slide indicates student preferences. So this slide illustrates the reasons they gave for the school they selected. as you can see, regardless of school, students rank the same 4 criteria as being important to them in their decisions. Similarly, the bottom 2 categories were also the same, regardless of school. So a high degree of alignment from students across all of these different schools in terms of what was important to them. When we look at the parent survey, you'll see a similar pattern. So this parents indicated the same 2 criteria as the most important to their choices, again, regardless of school, academics and school reputation. Similarly, they had the same, criteria at the bottom in terms of family members currently attending. So as you can see, we have students and parents consistently looking for the same things in our schools, yet making different choices about which schools they feel best meet their needs and will support their students in their high school careers. The next set of slides will step us through some enrollment data about first the incoming 9th grade class for this year and the patterns there, and then kind of the impacts overall in terms of high school enrollments. And many of these, there's additional data attached to the board docs of both the school choice presentation as well as the demographic data. So this is not all of it, and there's more detail that can be found there. In terms of just overall enrollment trends for a freshman class. So you can see this slide presents the enrollment trends of the past 10 years. What you can see here is that for much of the past decade, the Deering High freshman class was higher than Portland's enrollment until the incoming class of the fall of 2019. Since that time, the trends have reversed, and the freshman class at PHS has been consistently larger than at Deering for the past few years. Obviously, as you can see, for Casco, it has been a very stable enrollment of 100 given their enrollment cap. So who are those 9th graders that are coming in year to year? So there's a lot of lines here, but I would kind of summarize that this slide, demonstrates the racial composition of this incoming 9th grade class. So as you can see here briefly, this is, as we'll see in a later slide, consistent with district-wide trends in that our overall number of students of color have increased at all schools, while the percentage of students who are white has declined. There are certainly some variations in year to year by school, but overall these trends are consistent with our district-wide trends. In terms of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, outside of the outlier of this past year, as the superintendent has mentioned around the completion of the free and reduced lunch forms, we see some similar trends. You can see that Casco closely mirrors our district averages, while Deering High has tended to historically have more students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and Portland High has had the opposite. So what does that mean for overall enrollment at our high schools and what that means of the overall student body? So this slide first, shares the overall district enrollment, which you can see is generally quite stable over the past number of years. Down below, you can see the enrollment for each of our high schools. So again, given the enrollment caps at Casco, you see a pretty flat line of roughly 400 students. And what you see with Deering and Portland is essentially mirror images of one another. Right, where Deering High had a consistent, number of students and then began a decline, and Portland started at a lower number of total enrollment and has seen an increase over the past number of years. So what has that meant in terms of the overall populations at our high schools in terms of how they look in present day? So looking at the overall demographics, you can see some of these same patterns. So on the far side, you see the district-wide percentages in terms of the racial breakdown. So you can see district-wide, we've seen a decrease of the number of students who identify as white and an increase of our number of students who identify as students of color. We see these same patterns playing out in our high schools similarly. Deering, however, Deering has consistently averaged 10 to 15% of a higher percentage of students who identify as students of color. In terms of free and reduced lunch, again, with the caveat for the data of this past year, you see some similar patterns as we've seen in the other data. About Casco, again, mirroring kind of our district-wide averages, has just under half of our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, while Deering has had roughly over 60% of students who qualify, and Portland High has had, on the converse, average around 40% of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. Finally, our last slide just shares kind of a potential projection of the ongoing enrollment at Deering, if the current enrollment trends continued. So as you can see, we would see Deering continue to decline and kind of settle out, in the mid 600s in terms of their overall student body and population, if the current patterns continued as they have for the past couple of years. So broadly, what to make of all of that data? I think, certainly there's a lot of it there, but I think two significant trends to just acknowledge is one, the enrollment disparity between Portland High and Deering. So it currently is about 200 students. Based on those projections, if enrollment patterns continued, it would remain at that, if not a little bit more, given the size of our, upcoming classes as they move into high school. The other is the overall demographic disparities between the high school student populations that we've seen play out, to some degree with our ninth grade and representative across the overall student body, where Deering High has a higher percentage of, has higher than our district averages of students who are BIPOC or qualify for free and reduced lunch. Casco roughly mirrors those district numbers, and Portland High has had, generally been lower than our district averages. To be able to manage for these enrollment changes, and given the timelines in play of our enrollment process and our staffing process, we've had to make some shifts around staffing between the high schools over the past number of years. So so what you see here is a table of some of those moves to accommodate for the increased numbers of students that we've seen at Portland High over the past few years, and the decreases at Deering to be able to maintain the staffing. However, because of the conflict between our budget timelines and current enrollment timelines, these have been in 2019-20, and then again over this summer. These have been changes that we've needed to make in the late summer, or even over in the spring or over the summertime after budget adoption, which creates challenges for the impacted staff that are needing to move, and for counselors and admins working to plan complex master schedules to be ready for the opening day. In addition to some of those staffing challenges, there are programmatic impacts that both Portland and Deering experience in different ways. So the first is kind of the differences around class sizes and class offerings. At Deering, with the reductions in student and staff, they are challenged with maintaining the breadth of comprehensive school offerings while serving a student population that is higher needs in terms of more free and reduced lunch students. At Portland High, given the increase in their sizes, some students are not able to access electives and other courses because of the volume of students requesting them, and so they're on the other side of that equation, having challenges to provide students with access to their courses. Additionally, the enrollment changes have impacted the caseloads that many of our support staff are managing, as we have not adjusted staffing for those roles with the enrollment fluctuations. Thus, staff at Portland High, like social workers, guidance counselors, and even office staff, have higher ratios than at Deering or the other schools. Lastly, the decrease in enrollment at Deering and increase at Portland High has, had impacts in terms of co-curricular opportunities. So given the just sheer fewer numbers of students at Deering, that's led in some cases, and it varies by sport and by student interest, but in some cases to have fewer opportunities for first team and to be able to field, all of the kind of teams and clubs because of the fewer numbers of students. At the same time, in some sports, certainly not all sports at Portland High, have cuts like track and cross country and things like that can take any student who wants to participate. But some of the other programs, do involve cuts, and given the larger numbers of students, right, that means fewer students are able to have access to those programs. So the enrollment disparity kind of plays out in terms of impacting both schools, but in different ways. To conclude this evening, just a reminder, as the superintendent kind of teed up, these were the options that were presented to the board in 2019. So the first being kind of providing greater central support for the overall selection process, to have a more aligned presentation of the school options. The second idea was to move up the timeline of the choice process to address some of the staffing challenges that emerge when when enrollment shifts significantly from year to year. And the two more substantive changes that were presented at that time were to consider reestablishing neighborhood boundaries for the high schools, or to create a lottery system that applied to all three schools to keep enrollments consistent from year to year and aligned to district averages. At the time, the board's interest was to provide more centralized support for the process, which is what we've done over the past 2 years with the coordination of the steps in the selection process, as I described earlier, supporting the production of kind of similar collateral across the different schools so that there is a look and feel in terms of how we were presenting the programs, and the creation last year of a centralized website that housed all of this information to support easy access for students and families to that information. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and open it up for the board for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Townsend. Are there questions from the board? Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Assistant Superintendent, can you also tell us a little bit about how we go about students that request transfers after the start of the school year?
So generally, only in very exceptional circumstances do we consider transfers during the school year, and only then would we consider them at the semester. So we really want students to give it a go and to provide the resources and support to help students be successful. So generally, transfers happen over the summer, and at that time, it is kind of open in terms of transfers, but during the school year, it requires approval from both principals, and generally I get consulted on those. But
and the student could only transfer once, is that, or is there that we don't have a limit to that?
I'm not aware of a limit. Certainly, I lean on Principal Jepson and Principal Pierce with the historical knowledge. But so if either of you want to weigh in, but I'm not aware of a limit, though I'm not familiar with the student who's requested multiple transfers either the past couple of years.
It's a special club for those who've been to all three high schools. It's a rare club, but there are those who can claim that. But we don't have a formal limit. Hasn't been necessary.
Thank you. Yeah, if possible, to get numbers of how many transfers we've had over the last, I don't know how the length of years that we're looking at, just so to contextualize that.
Mr. Rodriguez, can I just ask, given the stress on the staff, is that a critical element as we're considering from a policy perspective?
No.
I just want to encourage the board to really be extra thoughtful of the workload that our administrative team has right now. So if it is important and considering where we're going with this, then absolutely. But if it's a small number of cases, I'm just not sure how, if it is central.
I guess the only reason I would ask that, and I guess we're having this discussion, anticipating a future discussion about options. And I figured that piece of information would be important if the board decides to stay with the choice policy, just so we're aware of it. Equally, if we were to move away from a choice policy, we'd want to know how we would manage transfers. And that's just within context. Adding is the only reason that I ask for it. But nothing that I'm asking, am I saying, do I want to see the data right away?
Would it be sufficient just to get a sense of the number of transfers in a given year?
Yeah, whatever information we can get, we have access. So I know that historically, we don't have really good, reliable data in a lot of situations. So when I ask these questions, I always mean them to the best of our ability.
Okay.
Without overburdening our staff. Yeah, so then the only other, not so much a question as a thought, is given that the choice policy puts us in this position where when we have an enrollment this disparity, we end up having a reduced resources in a building that then means reduce options for students and opportunities for students. I think it's fair to say that this policy inadvertently puts us, or rather makes us create inequitable outcomes, because some support structures also might go missing, or not support structures, but some options for our students might go missing. I think that through that lens, I think it's important to question this policy, as we look at the outcomes that it produces.
Can I just comment on that? I would be reluctant to say that the policy itself is the culprit in that. I mean, the policy begins by acknowledging the value of neighborhood schools. The policy is much more of a sort of broad vision statement than it is a directive to do things a certain way. And I think the issue has been that this is the way that we've chosen to move forward with high schools in Portland since 1979 and then 2005. And so, it isn't the policy necessarily that needs to change, but the procedures, the way that we are doing business, that, that could potentially result in what you just described.
Yeah. And hence why I say, like, inadvertently, it causes us to produce inequitable outcomes. It's not the policy, but just the way that it comes out in practice. So that's why I say that the board should look at it from that perspective. As we do everything else, that outcomes are really what we should base our, our equity lens on. And I guess just to, I won't build on that much more, but I guess given that the answers that the students give and the parents give for how they come about their choices, again, inadvertently, what ends up happening is this culture of almost competitiveness between schools. And I think we heard it through the community when we saw the enrollment disparity shift towards Portland High School. It was in some time, in some places, it was discussed as that was a victory for Portland High School. And while it certainly paints them in a really positive light, we saw that it has some very negative impacts on Deering High School, or in both high schools, because just the way that resources are shifted. So I think that being able to just, again, reaffirm that culture, that what we're trying to achieve here is give students the best option or the best choice that fits their personal expectations for their high school careers, is what we're trying to aim at, and not necessarily which is the best high school period. So I guess those are just the themes that I'm carrying through this discussion. Just wanted to share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. We're going to go now to Ms. Chung. Ms. Chung, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to comment. Oh, now I see myself. Oh, God. Let me look in a different way. Okay, I set my camera. Okay, anyways, I just wanted to comment on the presentation because, coming from a Deering student, it is kind of disheartening to see that the enrollment of our school has decreased over time. And I don't necessarily think it's something inherent within the policy that creates this very subtle, or right now it's a very small, segregation, I guess. I wouldn't even want to say it that much, but if we're having over time more free and reduced lunch students, more students of color opposed to the other schools, it is starting to become something like that. I don't think it's necessarily something with the policy, but I think that it is causing the experience within the high schools to be, like what Mr. Rodriguez says, more inequitable. And I think looking more at how we can try to centralize the support between the selection process to students, I think is important. I don't necessarily think the idea of moving it towards the the neighborhood schools where it's just like wherever you live closest to, you go to that high school. I think that'll definitely take away from like the uniqueness that each school offers. And a lot of students would be very upset about that because between Portland and Deering and Casco Bay, we all have different things that people generally like. That's not necessarily about the diversity of the school or the different like demographics that are at the school, but rather the schedules and the athletics, they are different. And it is like a little bit surprising, I guess, to see that everybody wanted the same thing for each school when it comes to like the schedule and the athletics. But yeah, that was basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chung, and thank you for your unique perspective. Really appreciate your joining us tonight. Now we're gonna, and Ms. Chung always joins us, but she has some conflicts tonight. So she's making a particular effort, despite her responsibilities to learning and school, to join with us and participate in this conversation. So thank you so much. Now we're gonna move to Mr. Burke. Go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a question, and in the spirit of this is not meant to burden anybody, just curious if we have it. Do we have statistics on students that are Portland students that are choosing to go to charter schools?
We do have that data. I don't have that at my fingertips, but it's easy to retrieve.
Okay.
And what is it that you would be looking for from that?
Similar to what we've looked at across the schools here, how many students are enrolled at charter schools and what are the demographics?
We won't have the demographics, but we.
Okay. Yeah, again, whatever's not burdensome, it'll just be a piece of the puzzle for me as I think holistically about this. The other two things that I have are just comments. One thing that comes up for me as part of this, and this is not by any means meant to be something that I think this is the year to even have the conversation, but I do wonder when I see those top reasons why people are choosing their places, and I think about our district and particularly reflected by Casco Bay, wonder about if at some point in the future, Portland revises its offering from a K through 12 perspective, just like we have an expeditionary learning track, if you will, the schools that from K through 12, you can participate within the expeditionary learning model. If there's not sometime in the future when we have a dual language track, an international baccalaureate track or other such systems so that students and families may choose an approach to learning and academics that suited their students' needs in accordance with those models. So I'll just say that here tonight, and something it's always on my mind, so to speak. And then lastly, I'll say something that I'm hearing tonight that I don't feel like I have enough information to fully parse out is the difference between equity versus diversity and inclusion. I'm hearing, obviously there's a difference in the enrollments across two of our high schools in terms of diversity of who the students are. I don't know what that means for the inclusion of what the culture is in those buildings. And I don't know what it means in terms of outcomes or when we talk about equity. So those are things that I'd need to know more about before trying to press into any changes.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Burke.
all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Russell-Better, and then Ms. Bondo. And Ms. Russell-Better, I'm sorry if I didn't see you before and you had to raise your hand on Zoom. But thank you for doing so.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it'd be easier to see when you're trying to get the whole room here. So I just had a couple of questions, and as a new board member that wasn't part of any of this discussion before, I apologize if they're very rudimentary, but I just wanted to understand, okay, so geographic districts, I know, Mr. Townsend, when you shared historically, you had some pieces about over time, but I didn't recall, was there any detail about when geographic districts had been? Was that in the 70s? Could you remind me?
What we understand is prior to 1979,
okay.
And it was the transition. I don't know if that means in the year of 1979
okay.
or 1980, but.
Okay, thank you. And so that really was, and this is just for me to understand the way it was, and maybe if we use that model again, what the purpose would be. So was that really just to have this part of the city and this part to make those even, or, and the way that we might look at that as an option? Or is it also about looking at socioeconomic, racial background and having that be a piece of balancing the buildings?
I mean, I don't know what turned up in those conversations. I would say my hunch would be that it was more just about overall enrollment, right? Attendance boundaries get adjusted to account for overall student numbers. I guess I would be surprised if the work, given the current state of kind of demographic distribution of our, in our elementary and K through, middle schools, that there was any intent to kind of do demographic balancing at that time. So I
would that be, in considering that as an option, would that be one of the pieces of the district's goal in that?
If that were a stated goal of the board in doing geographic boundaries, I mean, that would be obviously consistent with the policy. So I think that would be something that could definitely be done.
Okay.
That were the direction.
And I just wasn't sure, just thinking more of like districts for voting and how, like, I don't know the process, how that, how you develop that. Like, is there a model for doing that, or creating the districts?
I mean, and if you think of our middle schools and the way that they're, that they're organized, they're not 100% matched, but they're fairly leveled, and there's specific boundaries that were drawn at the time that they were drawn to achieve that kind of to achieve those kinds of levels.
Okay, thank you. And then I just had a question about the lottery idea for all three. So I'm just trying to figure out how that would work. So again, that purpose would be to try to create specific numbers in each school, right? But would the lottery also be trying to look at demographics and how, I guess the goal would be maybe, people choose, but then after, the numbers are filled, then you'd kind of give a second choice or something like that. Would that be?
Everybody would have a first choice, a second choice, and a third choice.
Okay.
And, most people would get their first choice or their second choice, and then a handful of people would get their third choice.
Okay. And so, would those two, and just looking at those options, it seems like, you're sharing these to kind of see because it seems like it would be kind of making one or the other of those. Is that right? I mean, because if we were doing the geographic, it kind of would be a separate than a lottery idea. Right? Like those would
I'm not making a recommendation that we move in any direction. Our purpose here today is to just keep in the board's awareness the fact that our current practice is resulting in these fairly wild fluctuations in student population at Deering and at Portland, and that those fluctuations bring with them programmatic challenges for the schools. And to the extent that we are concerned about that, we are concerned about it. I am concerned about that. And, just want to keep that in the board's awareness. When you see those fluctuations, it's important that you also understand what the origin of them is and, what the implications are.
I think I was just saying out loud, those seem like those would be different track options. And then
you can do both of them together.
Okay. So that's also possible. And then the other piece of the spring of 7th grade timeline, Mr. Townsend, I was just, is the thought of doing that just that really gives time? Was that sort of having that year before of planning and knowing ahead of time, like you said, the staffing issues that come up? Was that?
Right. Yes, essentially that works to accomplish or resolve that challenge, the staffing challenge. It may not need to start that early, I'd say, but that was kind of what the conversation was at the time. I think there's, it could still happen within the 8th grade year and move timelines up. That's certainly some conversations we've had.
Okay. And I just not know enough about the process. Can you see I see the benefit of that. Can you see any challenges with that? I'm sure there's some of like students not thinking about high school yet, right? But Can you see any other?
I mean, that's the main one. Our
Yeah.
middle school colleagues have just, we have students just settling into 8th grade, right? And starting to ask them about 9th grade, does that, how does that impact their 8th grade year? So those are the challenges that have been named. And I mean, I think, knowing enough in advance so that we can plan calendars and timelines and those kinds of things, just in terms of the staff at the high schools, they have leads, on each of these teams that help to do the engagement and develop all that. So it's similar work shifts timelines, but those are the concerns the middle school teams have raised.
Okay. Great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Banda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we don't have any recommendation. It's just approach, and I just want us to think about years to come. The reflection on these was may result, because when we talk about equity here, when I look at the aspect, I see mostly in the cultural inclusion here, the issue that it may happen in a couple of years. And I think in our equity policy, this is what we've been really emphasized about the professional development on really to emphasize on the cultural inclusion, because that's exactly why we define those choices. And I wonder about the 256 students who completed those surveys and over 100 parents stopped. How did we break them down? How we figure out, or it was just randomly? Then we send those surveys and we got them back from the student who really failed to complete it and those parents. Because it's really, really important, because we who are getting those surveys and who are responding or who are not responding is about the way they see about the culture and the inclusion. It's so important. We have 3 amazing high schools who providing the high academic and all really amazing staff who are really doing everything they could to try to build those high achievements for our students. But I think that's the way we bring the value of those different cultures. Because when I see these things happening in a couple of years, is there's going to be a high school segregated to just one specific race, and then the other one having really a low racial on one specific race. And that's the way we need really to think about it. I don't have any specific questions. I just wanted to see, because we don't have any recommendation, because I think we really need to start see what the picture is bringing, and maybe think about some to any reconsideration in a couple of years to see where we're going and what we're building as a community.
I would so appreciate that question. I mean, I think I'd acknowledge again, just kind of the overall trends in our student population that are playing out at all 3 high schools in terms of all of them seeing increases in student populations of color, students who identify as students of color. So whether that's Black, Latino, there have been different kind of growths at some of the high schools, but in general, they are all growing to be, more diverse, during more so, but each of our schools has seen a decrease in the students who identify as white.
Yeah, but also what I want to just emphasize the way we're sending those surveys, and then who are we targeting? Because when we're sending emails, it's not all our population. Parents, they're using email. So are we getting those surveys and considering to try to build those results based on those surveys? Yeah.
And I hear your point, and I will say that the previous survey showed exactly the same outcome, and in that particular case, I think like 400 plus students had responded to it. So it was almost everyone, because it was administered at school, and so I don't know that there's, that the who responded to the survey, certainly at least at the student level, didn't yield any different outcomes. And I don't remember what the number of parents that responded to the other survey. It was obviously pre-pandemic and people weren't getting surveyed left and right. And so I think there were, more people that responded, but the outcome was the same than what we saw. It wasn't the overwhelming majority of parents. That might have been more like 200 that responded at the time, and it was with the same outcome. So I hear your point, and I do think that it's something that we always have to be aware of. And also that in this particular case, at least at the student level, it didn't bear out in any difference in terms of the responses.
Right. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there other questions from the board? I have some questions. I'm wondering if we have data, I believe you might have presented it in 2019, on the budgetary impact of the differential enrollment. So I know that at least at some point during the budgeting process, we looked at essentially the inefficient management and what that meant from a budgetary perspective. And it'd be helpful to have to see those numbers again without requiring a big data analysis. So if it's data from the past that might be illustrative of, of the situation now, that would be sufficient. But just to give us a sense of what the budgetary impact is. And then I really thank the principals for attending tonight. And I had a question for Ms. Dame or Dr. Ahmed from Deering. I wanted to see if you would be able to speak to what you see as the impacts of the declining enrollment at your school, and specifically thinking about it from an equity perspective.
Thanks, Chair Figdor. That's a big question, and I'm not sure I'll be able to answer it comprehensively, but, I would say that Dr. Ahmed and I both would like for students to have, an equitable experience regardless of which school they go to, and that we believe we need, 3 viable high schools. And so Portland and Deering are similar in that, they need to be comprehensive public schools, meaning that, for any student from the city of Portland that walks through our doors, we need to have quality programming. So to me, that we do need a critical mass of enrollment, to create staffing, to create the breadth of programming that we do offer, which includes everything from a SLIFE program for students with limited or interrupted formal education to, an experiential based alternative ed program, to, a really rich array of AP offerings. So just to say that, there is sort of a number at which, you need to be at in order to just sustain the variety of programming, which is really important if you're going to serve any student who walks through your doors. Do you have any, does that help to answer, or are there any follow-ups?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Dr. Ahmed, were you trying to say something as well?
No, thank you very much. Actually, as Mr. Townsend mentioned in his presentation, the shifting of the enrollment has implications for both high schools in staffing, and that as a result, there will be equity issues. So as Ms. Dame said, we hope we will reach a point where we will have kind of like 2 viable comprehensive high schools where the students actually, wherever they can go, they can get what they need. And with that comes with the need of, I wouldn't say the board is in position to make whatever intervention they want, but we will say like the shifting enrollment has implications for student offerings as well as the staffing, and yeah.
I would just add one other thing if I could, which is, and this also would be true of any of the high schools, but when programs come and go, there's not the chance for them to really learn and integrate new learning over the course of years. So there's also, I think, real value in being able to sustain programs over years so that staff can really become experienced and expert in, that particular type of program.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you. And maybe I can ask the same question of Ms. Jepson. If you see equity implications in terms of the enrollment trends and the fluctuations we've seen, if you see them at Portland.
I think that we're always looking at equity. And that's a lens that we look at everything that we do through. So as we've seen enrollment increase, we've certainly had to make sure that programmatically and staffing wise that we're attending to that. It's always in the forefront of our work. So yes, it's there.
Thank you. I will say that I perhaps on the board and in Mr. Youssef. Well, let me just.
Yeah,
I might be in a unique position because I just went through the high school choice process as a parent. My older daughter is now a 9th grader, and I really appreciate the choice. I see the value in that. It was very interesting as a parent to see my teenager go through that process. And I think I understand why I believe the community values that. However, I just don't think our current system is sustainable. I think it's both out of sync with the Portland Promise equity and staff goals. It's a staff goal that people goal. Thank you. It hasn't even been a long night, so I have no excuse. And it doesn't make sense from a management perspective, whether it's the last minute shifting of staff, the budgetary implications, but at its core, the ability to have 2 comprehensive high schools in addition to Casco Bay High School. So I am interested in this board this year, considering a 3-school lottery where we're still offering choice, but we have some guardrails on it. And I think that looking at the enrollment trends, that if it's possible to make this change this year, given COVID, I would like to do that because it seems like the time is now. We're projecting a continual decrease in enrollment. If the superintendent and others think that it's just too much this year to make any changes, then I certainly would respect that. But that's where I'm coming from as a board member. Remembering that this presentation in 2019, having then gone through this process as a parent, really coming to value the choice aspect of it, but just feeling like what we're doing now isn't sustainable. It's out of step with our strategic plan. And from a management perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that is my thought on kind of where we're at here. Mr. Youssef, I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance earlier, but please go ahead now.
No, thanks, Chair. I think you covered most of my questions. I was about to ask if there is a plan to have more detailed data that looks the factors that cause certain group, I would say, go to certain school.
We at this point don't have a plan to do that. If the board were interested in a comprehensive, assessment of that would take a long time. That means focus groups and things along those lines that we don't have the resources to just drop everything and do. But, I certainly don't want to engage in that if this is, just for, an interest-based thing as opposed to, what is the specific policy aim that we are, that you're asking that question for. I guess my point is we don't have unlimited capacity to answer every possible question that anybody has about anything. So, unless we have a specific policy aim in asking those questions, I'm going to push back on it because it's a ton of work that would require, actually either surveying and then following up with focus groups to actually be able to say, to our African-American students, to our ELL students, to our white students, why are you choosing to go where you're going? You've seen the data, you see what the outcomes are. Presumably there's some reason, that things are trending the way that they are. But, for us to really be able to parse that out and be able to give you specifics would take a significant amount of work. And I guess my question is, what would you do with that?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. But what I was thinking, if in the long term, if we have more, let's say, as Ms. Thompson mentioned, 60% of free or reduced students are enduring, the needs are going to go up. And that require us to change or to implement certain things. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And, that's a fact. That's not something that we need to survey or question. Obviously that is harder to, this year than it was in the past, but yes, there was a very clear trend of having more students who are free and reduced lunch attending during than Portland. That's, that particular data point, as we've discussed before, is just, is no longer as solid a data point as we once had, because, fewer people are filling out applications. But, there's no question that is, that's a fact. And, we have had, significantly higher percentages of students who are free and reduced lunch at Deering than we did at Portland High School. And that's part of why we're bringing this data to you, because is that what you want to have in your school system, right? That's, I think, one of the fundamental reasons that we're, coming back and showing you the data again.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I, at this point, feel in agreement with the chair regarding the lottery. Like I do feel like that makes a lot of sense to have some sort of a lottery for all three schools. I just had a question about, I know Mr. Townsend mentioned the centrally supported selection process, and specifically that the centralized website is a piece of that. I guess I just wanted a little more understanding of, it sounds like that has shifted, but what are other pieces about that maybe I'm just not sure where it was and where that might end up being more centrally supported. So could you just give a little bit more context about that? That would be helpful.
Sure. I guess a couple other examples of things we did is, just, facilitating conversations amongst the high school teams about the presentations, around, setting norms and agreements around, what experiences kids would have at their visits and just aligning around that together. The other piece was, through the support of Grace's team, supporting around, producing some of the documentation, right? So that, families had access to information kind of in similar ways with similar look and feel. So we did stuff around their school profiles and things like that to make available for students and families. So those are a couple of pieces around that. And we're, yeah.
So are there other pieces that you see that could be implemented? I mean, perhaps along with the other changes we may make as a district, but do you see anything else in that area that you see missing? Or
I think there are limits to it if ultimately, so no, I don't see other significant moves there. We've, there are other kind of publicity stuff that we could produce and those kinds of things, and potentially would under any scenario, right? But I think, fundamentally, if it's, the ultimate system hasn't changed. And so I think we have a couple of years of data that hasn't had a significant impact on the enrollment patterns.
Okay. And just back to that, just one quick question about that potential shift of spring of 7th grade timeline, or, just something between that and what it is now. Does that seem like a pretty simple thing to implement, like that change? Like, would that be
I mean, with the caveat that nothing is simple,
Like, how much of a lift is that? As it, like, I just don't.
I mean, I think we need to land on it and just know. I mean, we're talking about similar activities that we've conducted for a variety of times. So it's not
Just
like we're
moving it
proposing
up.
to do different things. These are
Okay.
things that people have significant skill and experience, pulling off, but knowing and committing to the timeline is kind of what the urgency is.
Thank you. So
And I
that
will
just,
say that is one, and I think, Mr. Townsend referred to this, that is a significant concern to our middle school staff, just because it would push us to do this, at the beginning of the school year when everything else is happening to get routines established. And so that's what makes that challenging, not impossible, but challenging.
and it seems just even like a cultural shit, really, like, right? Because it's always been done in this time frame, right? So sort of like as a building in the middle schools would be like this expectation of a different way of doing it. So I guess I'm just advocating for considering that, in some way. That seems to me like a reasonable thing to give more time. So.
Ms. Russell, better if it's helpful from a parent perspective as well, just having recently gone through this. It's a lot when your kid is trying to make this decision. And, at least for my own kid, it was a lot. She was thinking a lot about, what she wanted in a school. And it was pretty fraught. And so I do, it's a time in adolescence where, it's, I think it felt good to have the time constraint of making the decision and then getting to go to that school. So I do question making that from a parent's perspective. I question making that decision and then having such a timeline until you actually get to go and be a part of your new school community.
I will say also just developmentally, I think that is a lot to, it's understandable for a young person to change their mind and get other information. And that is, and just thinking about it some more, that time frame does seem like a lot for an adolescent mind to be thinking that far ahead and knowing they could make different connections, have different interest, just within that year. So I do think that adds a little complexity to it, but thank you for the info.
Thank you.
To ponder.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions, but I just thought I would kind of chime in on my thinking on this to the extent that staff is looking and thinking about bringing this up in future agendas. My thinking of it is very much in line with kind of the concerns about how this policy is either helping or hurting our goals towards our Portland Promise goals. And, whether it's making sense from a management perspective. As I recall, in 2019, when we were discussing this, it was kind of in a crisis context. We had seen a major shift in enrollment, which we hadn't seen in years prior. And when staff kind of presented us with the option of ways to respond to it, we kind of picked the sort of softer policies with it in mind that perhaps this was like a 1-year thing, and hopefully it could kind of fix itself with some of these softer policies. But if it seems as though this is going to be an ongoing thing, and particularly in the context of our goals towards equity, I do think that it's ripe for consideration by the board as to looking at some of the more kind of backstop policies, like the
choice, three school choice, or geographic
lottery. Thank you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trevorrow. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? If not, thank you so much for this presentation. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Townsend. Thank you, Superintendent. I think as next steps, the superintendent and I will talk about how to move forward. And I'll circle back with the board as soon as we've had that conversation. All right, so next we're moving on to consent items. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value, and historical or commemorative significance, including over 250 backpacks filled with school supplies and water bottles valued at $500 from Jarman Kaltas, from Maine Standard Biofuels, school supplies, water bottles, notebooks valued at $150 from Jamie Marlowe, school supplies valued at $150 from Ambit's Post 25 Auxiliary, school supplies valued at $150 from Rick Talbot from ServPro of Portland, school supplies valued at $150 from Portland Kiwanis, and $500 from Martha Frost Insurance LLC for employee orientation expenses, and 52 gallons of hand sanitizer valued at $520 from downtown Portland. And we're very grateful to all of them for their generous support and contributions to the work of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you so much. Next, we're moving on to new business. Tonight, we have 4 items, and just as a reminder for new business, we do not have public comment or board questions or comments. We will have a workshop at the end of our meeting after we adjourn. Our first workshop is on these 4 policies. So let me read through them. First, it's first read of policy JEA, compulsory attendance. Second is first read of policy JLCB, immunization. Next is first read of policy JKD, suspension. And lastly, first read of policy JKE, expulsion. Again, we will have a workshop on these policies at the end of this meeting, and our intention is to consider them, including having questions and further questions in addition to the workshop tonight, discussion and public comment at our next meeting. So now we're moving on to personnel. Consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of teacher candidates, 1 year only. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell-Better, seconded by Ms. Trevorrow. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion?
Good evening, everyone. I have nothing to add except unless there are questions about the 7 candidates that we're bringing forward for your approval this evening.
Thank you so much. Are there any board questions? Seeing none, there's no public comment on personnel items, so we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving the personnel items listed. Election of teacher candidates, 1 year only. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Chung, I don't know if you're still with us.
She isn't.
She's not. And Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the motion passes unanimously. Next is consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of teacher candidates, probationary. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion?
Unless there are questions about the 10 candidates we're bringing forward for approval, I have no additional comments.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there questions for Ms. Stoddard? Mr. Rodriguez.
Just a quick question. I noticed a couple of new occupational therapist positions. I'm wondering if these are additional OTs to our staff, or are these filling in vacancies? Like, do we add OT? I know we had a discussion some time back about workload versus caseload for OTs.
I would need to confirm, but I believe these are filling vacancies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez and Ms. Stoddard. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, there's no public comment on personnel items, so we'll move right to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in support of approving the personnel items listed. Election of teacher candidates, probationary. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the motion passes unanimously. So we are about to adjourn, but I wanted to mention again that we have actually two workshops. So we first have the workshop on the proposed policy revisions that we just did first read on. And then, so again, that workshop is on our compulsory attendance, immunization, suspension, and expulsion policies. And then following that workshop, we will have a second workshop on the Charter Commission and School Board, school governance policy and management matters. So as the Charter Commission is meeting this year, we're going to have this initial workshop to talk about what is and is not allowed under Maine law and what are some of the Charter Commission revisions that could be made. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Trevorrow. All in favor, just with a show of your hands. It's unanimous. We are adjourned at 8:44 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.